So back to your LSU summer, your first June, July, you had about a 6 week schooling.
Yeah, well, the second half of the summer, I had 6 more weeks, and I was registered, as you can imagine, on probation because I had flunked algebra.
Right.
Well, I hadn't passed enough hours not to be off probation, see? So my second 6 weeks at LSU, I was on probation. And I passed enough courses that I was able to stay at LSU on probation in September when the regular session had started. By that time, I had finished 2 of my units of military science.
Mm.
And remember, I was in the infantry
Right.
because that was where I was recruited by Morning Bag,
Right.
a very fine guy. He was the commanding officer of Company A Infantry. But Tom, let me tell you a little incident in connection with that. I walked up on campus because one of the first things I did when I got there was to purchase a P.O. box. P.O. Box 7144. So I could write home.
7144. I'll be damned. You remember that.
Well, I got so. And so I went up there to get my mail, and by that time, some of the upperclassmen had introduced me to the fact that those little skull caps with a little yellow bib on which they had LSU, you had to write on that little skull cap, Ard Sylvest, Sir, written on his hip. And you had to say sir to every upperclassman. Well, I eventually got the cap. I didn't know I had to get one, and so
When did you come by the cap? When?
after I'd been there about a week,
Oh, okay. I see.
and before I went to by the time I went to my first ROTC class, I had gotten my cap and had my dog cap and the dog sign on it. And so I had gone from the dairy barn with that cap on and went to check my mail. That's before I knew that they had anything to do in military science other than attend class. This little guy named Lafitte was a sergeant in Company A. And he caught me somewhere on the middle of the campus, not far from the Indian Mountains.
Okay.
Stood me at attention and proceeded to just jump on me and go like a sergeant, you know. And I didn't have no way to defend myself and didn't have anybody to ask what I was supposed to do. I didn't know who he was or why he was giving me the upsound. That was one of the most terrifying experiences I ever had.
How long did that go on? How long did Lafitte chew into you?
About 4 or 5 minutes, and then he listened to me tell my story about where I live, because you see, all his people we lived in Pentagon Barracks, you see.
Right.
All the military people did, except the ag students that lived in the barn.
Right.
He didn't have anybody in Company A that lived in the barn, so he didn't know anything about the dairy or anything like that.
You probably had never been on that side of the campus.
Why he would have gone there, I don't know. So you talk about a fish out of a pond.
You flip-flopping around. That's
And
funny.
but by the way, it wasn't very funny to me.
I guess
The
not.
hazing was, and I was a hard-working kid doing my best, and I didn't like being treated like dirt, you know.
Sure.
And so the upperclassmen, not the juniors and seniors, the sophomores in the military section were the ones that just they absolutely abused the kids.
Well, it looks like they had just gotten finished being abused themselves. Is that perhaps what they were
The year,
passing it along?
1 year before, they were sophomores. Well, you see, I was
So
almost,
they had their Lafettes in their life, huh?
they certainly had. By the way, Tom, when we, there was a make of a rifle called a 1903. And it's a bolt action. And they used one to explain to us that that was the standard rifle for the Army, for the infantry.
Right.
But they didn't have any more guns for us to practice with because they had returned the guns to active duty. So they had a bunch of little dummy guns. So my first exposure to marching at LSU was a wooden gun because we weren't prepared for war. Frightening to think about it.
Yes.
Anyhow, I registered for, in September, in military science, and I registered for military science again in February. So I had completed my 2 years of military science in the infantry by the time the 12 months were gone. I didn't even have to, and they didn't have any more military after that because they'd already taken those advanced military classes, the juniors and seniors. The seniors, they gave them a direct commission, sent them straight to officers candidate school and gave them a direct commission 90 days later. Juniors, they took them and sent them into a longer thing and then through officers candidate school as well. And so they disappeared off the campus.
Right.
They disappeared.
I see.
Well, then they came back there and they had a bunch of them came back to the campus, but some of the ones that came there had been at Mississippi State or God knows where. They just put them in a bunch of outfits and scattered them around and put them into what was called a V5 program, a V7 program, and they marched them to class. So they had military classes in all the land-grant colleges and universities
I see.
in the United States.
I see.
Like that. And it was rugged, man.
Well, let me kind of summarize. So
But I was not-
you got on the campus in June of '42,
Right.
and so by the May, if that was the end of the '43 spring, by May of '43, you had gotten your military science units.
Yes, I'd gotten finished with it.
I see.
So I stayed there and went on to school until the end of the summer. I figured I had to stay there, Tom, because I didn't have a job. The only income I had and a place to live and sleep was in a dairy barn.
Right.
So other boys went home, but I couldn't go home because it would take me 2 days to hitchhike all the way there. Well, I did hitchhike, and I had one of the stores in Collard Greens, and I almost froze to death that night, you know.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, and by the way, in my book, it says that I ran in that freezing rain, either 4 miles or 5 miles, I forgot what it was. I checked it since then. It was actually 6 miles
Oh, so
that I had to run.
you actually measured it out. Went back up there and measured it?
Oh, yeah. When Patrick and I
Well-
were going back up there?
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know you had done that.
Yeah. And of course, you could look at a map and tell, but I hadn't done it. So I was conservative with the distance that I claimed that I ran and almost froze because I ran with a suitcase 6 miles
Damn.
in the freezing rain.
So the summer of '43, you were there on the campus. Other guys had moved on or graduated or had jobs, but you were there. You didn't have much choice, huh?
That's right, but the campus was not, there were other people in summer school too. And that was wartime, so a lot of people were working on an advanced system so that they could graduate sooner because the university was accommodating that. Well, that didn't matter to me. 365 days a year I had to milk cows. So I milked cows until I got so tired of milking cows because we were short-handed. And they had drafted just about everybody that was there. And so by the time I had been there for 12 months, I knew I didn't want to stay there because I was going to become 18 in September. But I wanted to stay there that summer and go to summer school and milk cows because that's what I was doing for a living. So I did that until I found out that they had a horticulture farm over there and I could go over there and work on that. And I was having to milk cows morning and evening and didn't have any other help. And the cows got to be milked, you know. So I got me another job over there in the horticulture farm in the middle of the summer. I think it was about July.
Where was that located at? Relative to...
Sorority Road,
Okay,
behind the Highland Hall, back that way,
okey doke.
between there and the lake. And anyhow, I got that. So I kind of celebrated my getting away from the cows because the horticulture farm was a three-bedroom home, and they let students sleep in there, and they had a cook that came and cooked a meal. That was better than a dairy barn.
That's high cotton.
Oh, was it? I was doing pretty good, you know? And they paid me the same rate per hour. I would be making 50 cents an hour plus room. And we I lived in a vegetable garden.
You didn't have to hang out with them smart old cows.
No, I thought, so what I did, Tom, I had a roommate there named Omar Cook, and he lived up in North Louisiana. And he invited me to go home with him. So he and I hitchhiked up to Caldwell Parish, where he lived. It so happened that my dad had lost a brother or a sister that had died at the time that I went up to in Caldwell Parish. At any rate, my dad had gone to his sister's funeral in Washington Parish. On his way back, he came back because he had to hitch rides to do that. And he'd commandeer a cousin to take him part way. So he came back out to LSU. He was going to come see me. Well, I wasn't there. I was gone. You talking about a pissed off old man.
That was the first time he...
And when he was pissed off, he could be kind of raunchy. So he got me on the phone. They told him where I was and where he went. Some of the other students did. And so he managed to get me on the phone, and he told me to get back down here right now. That's all he said. Get back here now. Well, I didn't have no way to go. I had to hitchhike. I turned around and hitchhiked back to Baton Rouge and went out there to the dairy barn, which I had already moved from, you know. So he asked me why I quit my job and all that kind of stuff. Well, I told him right quick. I said, well, listen, I was having to work too much, Papa. So I gave 2 weeks' notice to Mr. Henderson, and it was okay with him. I mean, he wasn't going to force me to stay there. And so I got another job over here in the horticulture department, and they paid the same rate of pay and provided my housing, and he listened to me, and I introduced him to Paul Henderson, and Paul told him, Mr. Sylvest, we were using your son as a supervisor. He's the best hand that we've had at this dairy barn. And he told me that it was just too much work for him. He had to do something else. So he got his job with the horticulture department, and he left. And it certainly we've been glad to have him. My dad didn't say a word. He just went on, got in the car with Johnny or Carl, whoever he'd gotten to the dairy barn, and left. It floored him.
You just couldn't imagine? You didn't know what to say?
He didn't know what that stupid little kid.
He didn't have much respect for you, it sounded like.
Well, up to that time he didn't.
Yeah.
But he got a bunch of it in a damn big hurry.
He got a lightning bolt from Henderson.
Yeah. And, well, he was proud of me then, when Henderson told him all of that. But he didn't say much about it because he didn't compliment his kids. He didn't, I never got a compliment out of him in my goddamn life. And to my face. I heard him tell people good things about me that he didn't know I was listening to. That's how I learned that he thought well of me. Well, this will be kind of things. At any rate, I was in summer school, and I registered in September. And then I realized in September I also had to go register, so I did. And I had to go to Provencal to register, to Natchitoches.
For the draft?
For the draft, for World War II.
Because you had turned 18?
That's correct.
Or you were turning 18?
That's correct, yeah, I was turning 18. So I went and registered when I was 18, and the people that I talked to, not the board members, but the other people my age, knew what was happening, and told me, hey, they're gonna grab you immediately. Because the board here don't have enough 8-year-olds, they're not the 18-year-olds, they're not enough people. Each board had a quota, and they didn't have enough people becoming 18 to fill their quota. So they're gonna grab you immediately, because you go in infantry. That scared the fool out of me. I had already gotten acquainted with the infantry at LSU. I knew what infantry was. I knew what artillery was. They had one of those units at LSU. I knew what ordnance was. They had one of those units. So being knowledgeable about it, I had looked at the magazines, which Johnny and Carl had given me subscriptions to, about a year before I graduated. Collier's and Liberty, 2 magazines.
Before you graduated high school?
Before I graduated from high school.
Okay.
And I had learned that if you had 2 years of college, there was an ad in one of those magazines that said you could qualify if you also qualified physically for cadets if you had 2 years of college. So I had my 2 years of college in 14 months, 15 months. June 1942 till September 1943.
Right.
So I told my parents, I said, if I go in there right now, they need people in the infantry, and they're gonna give me a rifle, and I'm gonna have to go to the front line. I don't want to do that. I want to be in the Air Corps, and I can get into officer training school, and if you let me enlist, but I can't do it without your permission. when I explained it to them, they agreed to it. They didn't want me to be a foot soldier because they were familiar with foot soldiers that lived near Camp Beauregard in World War I, you see. So they let me enlist. So I went straight and told the draft board that I wanted to go in cadets. And I filled out my application with them, and they said, good. Now, so we'll take care of you. So they sent me to Shreveport, Louisiana for my physical. They had a place in Shreveport at the time called Fort Humbug. It was an induction station into military service because I had to pass the physical. So they had a building there that people from North Louisiana, Northwest Louisiana went to get their physical. So I went there and got my physical, and when I passed the physical, they told me that I would be contacted within a few days. So sure enough, in November, about the 20th of November, I got a notification from the draft board for me to report to Camp Beauregard, Louisiana, in Pineville. So on the 23rd, I went to Camp Beauregard, and they put me in uniform. They gave me clothes that didn't fit, all that kind of stuff. And they gave me my duffel bag that had my Army serial number on it, 38, 52, 20, 59.
Wow.
They didn't put the old serial number on there. They put the last 4 digits of the serial number, and they also put my name on that big duffel bag. And all of my belongings that I had went in the duffel bag. I stayed 2 nights at Camp Beauregard. They told me that I would get on a truck the following morning and go to New Orleans. I got on the truck with my bag the following morning, went to New Orleans, got on a train, and wound up at Keesler Field.